Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are you? We are at the end of May now. I know in the last episode, 244, I talked about Memorial Day, and I think now we just had Memorial Day. If you're listening to this the day it comes out, it was yesterday. If you're listening to this in the future, it really doesn't matter, does it? So we are just about to June of 2024. How are y'all doing? Today's episode with Jen, I'm not even sure to tell you what we talked about. I did take some notes. We talk about burnout, honoring your rhythms, having times when you're feeling more quiet and inward, kind of more contractive and more expansive. And Jen said something that I really appreciate. She said, rest is not the opposite of productivity, and that needing to rest and to cocoon often allows our creativity to come back. And I think when we cocoon, we're afraid that we're never going to come out of it. And I think that may be a little bit of what's going on with me that we talk a little bit about. We also talk about when you have a rupture in a relationship and you get very dysregulated, how it can be challenging to reintegrate into that relationship when the level of dysregulation is very high. We talk about internal family systems doing part works and where do we get that kind and loving presence when we're kind of stuck in our head and very intellectual, which is where many of us needed to be because that was very protective. But when it comes time to do healing work, it can be challenging because those parts that kept us in our head and out of our feelings, now it's time to do the feeling work and having that gentle parental, maybe parental isn't even the right word, but having that gentle, loving, nurturing voice to guide us through. And how do you get that if you've never had that? So I don't know. I think it's an interesting episode. I'll let you listen and tell me what you think. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen. How are you?
Hi there, Patricia. How am I? I'm okay. I'm okay today. I definitely been practicing my, here are the stressors in my life outside of me, and here's the experience of stress in my body. Amelia Nagoski writes all about this in her book, Burnout. And it's really helped me be able to separate all the kind of crazy stuff that happens in life and the stress response in my body and how to take care of them separately.
Yeah. I'm sorry you're going through stress. I know it's hard. And for the listener, if you're not familiar with the book, I'll put it in the show notes if I remember. This is a book on burnout, but it's not autistic burnout. So it's very helpful, but I just want to clarify that it's not about autistic burnout, but the burnout cycle.
Mm-hmm. How are you, my dear?
I think I'm okay. It is so funny, Jen. The last couple of days have been really hard. I was crying on the phone to you last night. I just needed to be heard. I've been sleeping really well. I woke up feeling great this morning, and I haven't had any clients this morning, and I've just been taking care of myself and crocheting. And it's interesting that I don't have words for this. I thought about walking the dogs because Steve is golfing and I didn't. And like when I don't move my body, I think something's wrong. And this happened on Sunday too, that I was going to paddle, but it rained and it was windy. And then I just stayed in my pajamas and crocheted and watched TV all day, which I enjoyed, but I also felt understimulated. And I feel like I've been in this place where I'm quiet. My world is very small. I'm not doing a lot of things socially. I'm really enjoying crocheting. I'm creating things without a pattern. I finished a baby blanket. I'm starting a new one. Like I'm really enjoying this process, but it feels very inward and it's hard for me to not judge it. And I think I have a value of when I'm active and doing things. I think I feel better and I feel more connected. So I don't know. That's a very long answer.
Yeah, I love that you're kind of honoring what your body seems to be asking for and tuning in that way. And I'm glad that you're not judging it. It's funny, when my kids were little and I was homeschooling them, we followed this methodology that really tried to work very closely with nature. And so throughout the day, we would tune into moments of expansiveness and then moments of contraction. And it really just became a very normal part of our life and part of our practice. And what you're saying is reminding me of that. It's so much pressure to be like, we should be on all the time, or we should be producing, like whatever version of it for us, right? That as opposed to these kind of breath in, breath out, like just, expanding and then contracting a little, being big and out, and then being kind of small and circling in. And I think we need both. And we give ourselves such a hard time.
I agree. It has been hard for me to stay out of judgment. It's also been challenging to not feel like this is a permanent condition and that it's always going to be this way. And I think that there's still a part of me that has some ableist values around being active is more desirable than not being active, and being social is more desirable than not being social, and being connected is more desirable than not being connected. And it's not that I'm isolating or not answering calls. I have a couple people here locally that I could spend time with, and I'm just not feeling up to it. It feels like it takes a lot of energy. There's still a lot of internal processing that's going on for me, and I don't feel like I'm at a very solid baseline, or if I hit it, it doesn't feel like it lasts for very long. And then it's hard for me to not have judgment about that too. Like I'm really working on self-compassion. And part of me, even before we recorded, like, I'm tired of talking about my stuff. I'm tired of being in my stuff. Like, I'm just ready for something else. And I don't even know what that is. I am paddling today, and I'm looking forward to that. I think that would be great to get out on the water. And it's just, this may be the episode. I don't know.
I'm laughing because you're always so like, no, and now you're the one saying
I know.
That's funny. That's great. I don't, again, it's like, I wish we didn't view these things as like opposite of each other. Like once I realized that this like rest was not the opposite of productivity, but that I was able to rest so that I could then be productive. It's like they are not mutually exclusive. They're actually, really work well together. So I hear you. And I mean, you come by this honestly. These are definitely the messages that we get. And I think it's everywhere. This like being afraid.
Yeah.
And afraid that if you go into cocooning, you're just going to stay there and never come out. And it's like game over or something.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes the people around us are scared of that too. I mean, I know that was thank you so much for that feedback last night. I didn't even realize that I think the lens I think that's useful is like, I was not as emotionally available last night. So what did I try to do? Tried to tell you how it was all going to be okay instead of just letting you sit where you were and being there with you.
Yeah.
And then that's the thing I love about our friendship. It's like one or the other of us gently points it out, and it's like, oh yeah, wow, I did just do that, didn't I? And we don't have to be perfect,
right.
And we don't have to magically know what everybody needs. We just have to be willing to be curious and to stay open.
And having that safety in the moment. So what we're talking about is more trauma stuff on my part. And Jen and I connected earlier, and we were going to talk, and then she had something she needed to take care of. So we agreed that we would talk later. And I was just telling Jen how kind of what I've told you, how hard things feel. It feels like it's not going to change. I'm just really in it. And I was crying. And you were trying to remind me of how connected I am and how it's not going to always be this way. And I think I asked you, like, is this feeling like it's too much for you? Because I was really aware that, and part of this trauma that I'm processing is it was not okay to have big feelings. It was not to express sadness, anger, any of that stuff. My job was to contain it so that nobody else had to feel dysregulated because they couldn't handle their own stuff. And so it was a recreation of that happening with you had I not been aware of it. And I asked you and you're like, no. And I said, part of what I need is just to let it be really awful right now and to have you be with me while it's really awful. And it was so, this is one of the things that I appreciate about our relationship, and that when there are misattunements, and something happened the other day too, And I caught it in the moment, but I didn't say anything. And then when we hung up, I texted you about it. And you're like, oh gosh, I didn't even, this is what was going on for me. And I just have such a deep appreciation that when I'm either able to catch it in the moment or say something or after the fact, that we have this ability to work through it. That is huge. That is really huge. And I think that that's probably one of the reasons why I woke up feeling really refreshed this morning, is that those feelings just were witnessed and heard without having to be changed or made better or anything. That's just a gift that you were able to just be with me in what felt like blech.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so funny. So that in pretty quick succession, there have been a few times, discrete times, where I've not done it well, so to speak. I'm showing up, but it's the openness to the feedback, right? And I guess that's just important, because I think we feel a lot of pressure to like get it right for each other. And, my version of some of the attachment injuries are showing up probably I'm glad it's not back at you, because I think that would be very hard if you were the catalyst, and again, I think that the catalyst is a sacred role later on in life, right? So that it's not formed now, right? It's usually early childhood stuff. So my catalyst, right, it is happening in like the dating container, and I'm getting the feedback from you and making the adjustment. And then if I'm giving it's really helping me get a very wide scope of how we do this as humans. This just being, whether it's misattuning, and I don't know, when there's a lot of generosity, love, when there's less self-defensiveness, and just openness, right? And that's a lot of nervous system stuff too, like being able to calm your nervous system down, because once it's activated and you're sort of hijacked, then you're just always looking for a threat. Yeah. And sometimes the threat is like our self-concept. So if we haven't gotten our heads around the perfectionism stuff, it can be really tricky.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's been really good for me to have you speak up. And I'm like, oh, and it's holding that mirror up for me to reflect in. Right. And there's ways that you do that are really, really skillful. Hey, I'm noticing, or this is how I experienced it. It's not accusatory, right? It's not kind of coming for me, which is not going to do anybody's nervous system any good. And then making me brave about saying things like that in my other relationships too.
Yeah. Well, it seems like you and I are going through a parallel process, but in my relationship with you, you're the catalyst for some of my attachment wounds, which is not about you. And in another relationship, somebody else is a catalyst for some of your wounds. So it's like when we have stuff with our kids and then with our parents, that we're experiencing it on like the giving and receiving end. I don't know how else to articulate it.
Right.
Yeah.
No, but it's really interesting to be like, ooh, it's beautiful to have that flexibility of vantage point, I guess is how I'm experiencing it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard. And one of the things that I've been talking about with you and that I've been struggling with, and anything I say on this podcast, just take it with a grain of salt, because I'm sharing with you in the moment as I'm going through things. And I think my perspective changes. I grow and I change. And I really was under the impression, based on the work that I'm doing with my coach, looking for the rule and then finding a rule and then finding out maybe that wasn't the rule that she had said. And I thought it was totally up to me to figure this stuff out and to work it out on my own. And because I keep getting tangled up in this reenactment with you, that I'm not bringing as many things to you and trying to work on them on my own, but then I'm recreating and reenacting my own childhood where I had to work everything out on my own, and not knowing what the rules are and not knowing how to do it and not wanting to, quote, act out with you. It's just been challenging. And then I'm sensitive, and then I'm feeling like I want to connect, and then I don't feel connected. I mean, it's just been a lot to navigate and to hold on to. And I'm sharing this with people because I know that I'm not the only one that experiences it. And the other thing is, I think being autistic, I never really had healthy relationships modeled. So I'm always looking to see what they look like, but I don't know what they are. And if I have rules that I've learned in the past, then those are kind of hard and fast rules that I apply because I just don't know. There's a part of me that's a very well integrated adult and manages very, very well. So it's not like I'm coming from this wounded place all the time, but currently this is what is more present for me than the stuff that is easier that I enjoy, that it's a little easier to navigate. But I think it makes it hard. And then, this part of me that feels, and this is not, so we didn't talk about discussing this. So can I just say something that has nothing to do with you, Jen?
Yeah, sure.
Like there's this part of me that gets, it's like just unsatisfied. And it's not about you, but and then I tell myself, like, I'm never going to be happy with anything. Like, whatever you say, whatever you do, like, it's not enough. It's not right. It's not about you. And the only reason why I'm saying this is because I know that I'm not the only one. And I think that when we don't know that this is happening, we try and get the other person to change and jump through hoops. And sometimes there are things that are current in the relationship that we do need to mention or ask about or say something about. How do we figure out when we need to say it, when it's in the past? Like, heck if I know, because I feel like I'm just muddling through this. But I think that these are things that we don't talk about. I know that friendships can be really, really challenging when you're autistic. We often attract other people that are also neurodivergent, whatever that is, but we don't get a lot of this modeling and we don't know how to do this stuff. And so it can be just really challenging. So can I just check in with you and see if anything I said, like how that was for you hearing it?
No, it's really fine. I know my experience lately, and I think this comes from parts work. I can feel when it's a young part because it has a certain like visceral sensation to it, and it's not matching what's going on kind of more present day. Mm-hmm. There is still a present day issue. It's just the emotional intensity underneath it may also be fed from something else. And I know one of my favorite parenting techniques is to narrate, like just narrate what's going on with yourself, inside yourself, with your child, making some guesses about what's going on with them inside. And I'm finding that that's super helpful. And I'm experiencing that from you as being super helpful. Like, I mean, I know for you and me, and I don't know how this would go for like someone that does more externalizing, although I suspect it would also help. Mm-hmm. But especially when you're internalizers, like and you're in a close friendship or relationship, we don't have to keep guessing. And then that doesn't mean we know the answers. We may not. You may be like, I don't know if why I'm feeling this way, but this is what I'm feeling. And having that space to not be figured out, but to still be kind. And we don't have to have it figured out. Just being able to talk about it. And to me, it's never an either or. And I do get asked this a lot by clients. And this is a conversation that I have really frequently with people, which I think also informs like you doing this podcast. It's coming from sitting with people and knowing that this is a ubiquitous experience, right? Or something that just happens a lot. So this idea of like, well, which is it? Like, is this childhood stuff? Is this just me? Is this the other person? Is this, and really it's both. And that's the invitation to be really known, right? Like into me, you see, and it doesn't have to be this one or the other, either or, and it's okay to talk about without knowing the answers. And that's something that I've had to like work on, because I kind of like to go journal, go by myself, not let anybody in until I've got it neatly like tied up in a bow. And here's what I know is going on. And thank goodness I've like stopped doing that, because what it does is it prevents me from interrelating, right? Because I don't have it all figured out. And just, being able to, there's my favorite phrase again, right? The F if I know. Yeah. I don't know, but here's what's going on. And it will change because we are dynamic and growing.
Yeah.
I love that you can talk about it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that we can. I have to say that when things are very intense and these attachment wounds come up, because I'm such a strong internalizer and it wasn't okay to express things, my automatic go-to is everything is fine. And I really internally kind of clamp up on any feelings. So sometimes that served me, and sometimes it serves me in responding in an adult way. I'll say specifically with you, which is what I want to be able to do, even if I'm having parts that don't feel that way, because I want to be able to separate those things out. But in this interim period, it has been hard because I know that I do this reenactment with you where I'm thinking that you're someone that you're not. and it keeps me from being in the moment with you. And so I don't want to do that, but I don't know if I'm doing it. And then trying to sort that stuff out has been really hard. And I've just been in, not every day, but many days, been in such a reactive place that normally when I'm feeling solid, I can let you know. And if I bump up against you, it's okay. And I can manage that. But when these attachment wounds are really running high, I don't know that I have the ability to bounce back if we can't attune. And then that makes it harder. So I, don't want to take risks. And I also don't reach out as much because I just feel like everything feels big and I don't feel very grounded.
Yeah, I understand that. Although I will tell you, my experience of you, I think, is one that's like, I experience you far more grounded than I think, you do, which makes sense because a lot of the storm is internal, right? Yeah. And I think I said it to you the other day, like, so I have this metaphor I use, and I imagine tomato jar, and it's kind of like all your inner turmoil is in this tomato jar, and you can speak for what's going on inside the tomato jar, or you can start flinging tomato jars and making a big mess, right? And then you have to repair that kind of stuff. And I know for me, that metaphor helps me understand, like, if I let loose on this person, now I'm going to have even more repair work to do. And that's okay. Like, we can do repair work. And sometimes there's pros and cons to everything, as long as you're not hurting anybody. Like, try not to get someone in the head with your tomato jar. But it makes, I mean, tomato sauce is really hard to clean up. It's oily. It's all over. It's like, it's really messy. And I know that for you and I, like, sometimes we have like held onto our tomato jars and like looked at each other and been like, oh my goodness, like, this is really, but we've never smashed them.
Right.
And it's funny. So like, in one of my relationships right now that I'm working through a lot of this stuff with, he invited me, like, okay, well, let me know, like, really. So it wasn't like the tomato jar didn't break or crack, but it was kind of like, go ahead and open it and let me know what's in there. And, I'm Italian, which is funny. So there was a lot of like, it was that part of me, sometimes it feels a lot like a belligerent teenager, right? But in the context of, hey, I kind of want to know, like, what's going on? What's the story? And then for that to be received in that context as, oh my gosh, thank you so much for telling me. It was a really healing experience for me.
Yeah.
You know? And I feel like between you and I, like, same thing, like, we can really talk about like what's going on here. And I'm air shaking my tomato jar right now.
Right.
And I think that, again, someday you and I might break or we may have a mess to clean up, but I think we can do it. And that's what I love, is that I'm feeling so much more confident in a lot of things. So even as you're dysregulated, like, I have not gotten any, I don't have any tomato stains to be getting out of my clothes right now. I'm just going to keep going with this metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have mixed feelings. So part of me has pride because I don't do that. But part of me also wonders how much this over control that I have really ends up hurting me. And one of my kids is not an internalizer. He's definitely an externalizer. So growing up, he had a lot of meltdowns. And he'd get angry, say and do things, and then he'd be over it and ready to move on. And we just felt like we had tomato sauce all over us and the walls, and we weren't ready. And so it was very difficult having to navigate tomato sauce all over the place very, very frequently. And then as soon as he opens a jar and throws it, he's like, I'm great, let's move on. And I'm a little envious of that in some ways, because all of the internalizing, it hurts me. I want, like, is this me wanting too much again? Is this my wounding? Is this a realistic need that I have? All of that internal stuff is exhausting. And the amount of control that it takes for me I'm proud of the control, and I also sometimes hate it. And I just wish that I'd kind of lose my shirt and just get it out and be done with it, because I don't know how much relief I get because of this constant processing.
Absolutely. And I think right there, in a nutshell, is a good reason why judging these things doesn't help. Like, can we just look at the pros and cons of each, because they both have them? And then flexibility, like, being able to kind of articulate and maybe choose. But choose might be a bad word, the wrong word here. But I think the not judging is really key. There's pros and cons to either. And then there's consequences to either. So that's mitigating the cons, right? Yeah. Tricky stuff, this being human.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'd like to dog for a little while.
Right? Yeah, me too. Well, and just a reminder, just because it's hard doesn't mean you're doing it wrong.
Right. Right.
And there's judgment right there. Wrong, right, wrong, right,
Right.
wrong. And as opposed to pros and cons. And then how do you take care of yourself?
Yeah. I know that when I was in autistic burnout and I just gave myself permission to be in that space and had no expectations, I rode through it because the expectation was that there were no expectations. And I think what makes it harder is, as I've come out of autistic burnout and then working through a lot of this trauma stuff, I still have expectations that I'm not aware of. And every time I go through a couple of days of really struggling and I'm staying present and I'm walking the dog and I'm paddling, like I talk about how proud I am of myself of not going into a shutdown mode. But then I haven't been in a shutdown mode, but I've just been in I'd rather sit in crochet mode. And if I don't have a plan and there's not structure, I'm like, I'll just crochet, which it's not a bad thing. And there is some kind of esteem that for me is attached to being outside, moving around. That makes me feel good. It makes me feel connected. I think my body likes movement, and just figuring out how to be in this space and know that it's just what it is for right now and it's not going to be for forever. But when you were talking about, I think when we have trauma and those attachment wounds or whatever that trauma is gets activated and our system gets dysregulated, it can be really challenging to figure out how to go back into that relationship. I'm not talking about with you and I where there's a high level of safety and I can be dysregulated and own my stuff and talk to you about what's going on so that we can reconnect. But when it's a relationship where I feel like I have to be regulated and contain myself to go back in after a rupture, that's a little harder.
Sure.
And I'm really looking at historically how dysregulated I've gotten when I don't feel seen and heard and I've had bumps and hiccups. And that reintegration process, it's challenging. It's a little baffling to me.
Yes. I mean, I'm thinking of like times where you have to go back into like work situations or school situations, or even in a relationship that's in its very, very early stages. You know, there's like, just takes time to build trust. And I don't know about for you, but it's like the more I feel like something's not allowed, like the more present it just is, you know, which is, I guess, where, you know, connecting with someone you do trust and processing it, maybe even journaling, writing it down first, right? So that it gets some sort of container for some of that expression.
Yeah.
I know that many a time I'll like cry in my car and because it's energy that has to go somewhere. And if we've just bottled it up, I've had it come out at very inopportune times. Let's just we'll leave it at that.
Yeah. 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 I'm a big crier. So that's definitely a big way that it comes out, talking about it. But I've been more reluctant to do that on the podcast because some of these have been interpersonal things. And I just want to be more mindful. But that's often what I do when I'm upset is I just sit down and record. But that is not something that I felt like I felt comfortable doing because of the other person, not because of me. I'm really okay talking about my stuff in the moment. It's actually quite helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a little bit of a pivot, and maybe we should do a whole episode on this. I don't know. I'm wondering when we do parts work internally with ourselves. So I've been doing a lot of that, of having, you know, my child, my adult, this archetypal, loving, present male that really does a lot of the work. How do you, when you're doing this kind of work with other people, but they never got that loving voice? Like for me, I don't know how to articulate this, but I feel like I'm kind of amazed that this archetypal father that I use has the most amazing things to say. And some of them are things that I say, some of them are things that you say, and some of them I have no idea where the heck they come from. It's like channeling this higher power that just has these really insightful, loving, caring things to say. But for people that don't have that experience and just kind of get stuck because they don't even know what those reparative statements are, what do you do when you work with people?
I mean, that's a great, great question. And this is something that the IFS folks, right, which is internal family systems, really are very solid about. And this is why IFS is really a psycho-spiritual model, that when you say, like, I don't know, it's coming out of somewhere and it's this like higher power, we call it self with a capital S. And it's really this like soul substance, the qualities of which are confidence and creativity and courage and compassion and a lot of wisdom, also playful. And it's energy, I guess but they maintain that this does not need to be built. This does not need to be strengthened. What tends to happen is parts are humanity, right? So if capital S self is like our soul substance, and then our parts are more like our humanity, right? Need to be worked with to rest back is like one of the phrases that I use a lot, and try to like, what's there when those things are quiet. And it's kind of like clouds moving away from the sun we never need to create, and that it's there for every person. There's not a single person that does not have access to it. Even our parts can have access to it. It's not like this black and white, we either have parts or we have self, like that there's a juxtaposition that, happens there, or like an infusion, so to speak, when we're less blended. So it's a great question in the therapy context, right? Or coaching, if you're using it in that modality. There is a time where you're borrowing, so to speak, the experience of self. And again, it's an energy. It's not always necessarily the words you say as much as the quality of your presence. And so the person's parts, right, are relating to the therapist's self. One of the things I love so much about this model, and it's so deeply respectful, that if the therapy gets derailed a little bit or it seems to not be moving, it's not on some sort of issue within the client. The issue then gets turned back on the therapist. Like, what part of you is not trusting this? So you're relating to your client's parts from your part. I mean, I have a lot of like parts that might pop out in session that I need to be like, hey guys, rest back. Right. So that, and I love that. I love that because I think historically as a field, it's been like, oh, well, your client's resistant, or it's something been that's like the heart of the jam is somewhere in the client. And in this model, that's not it at all. So, the therapist is constantly doing that inner work. Did I answer your question? Like blah, blah, blah about something else.
It did. Yeah. I mean, I think this is a big conversation and I don't know how much we can get to. And I'll just speak about myself that I was a client, because I've been doing therapy for a long time, that was so intellectual that it was really, really, really challenging for me to get to a place where I could drop out of my intellect, frontal lobe, into my heart, amygdala, and where the trauma is, to do the trauma work. And I think many of us, if you're like me, late diagnosed, internalizer, verbal processor, it just wasn't safe to talk about feelings. And so we've learned to intellectualize and understand things through an intellectual lens, but to be able to drop that and drop into that heart space where the healing, feeling, hard stuff, but good stuff happens. And I'm not sure how I was able to drop into that. It is much more natural for me now, but I think it's challenging when those protectors are so strong and that we don't know that it's safe to do it any other way.
Yeah, that's right. The cool thing about self-energy with capital S, right, is that it's not pushy. Because there's, what do you do when you tell a protector, like you push it, like it doesn't hold the agenda, like it's very patient.
Yeah.
And so this sense that like, you're trying to get somewhere with the part to let it loosen up is not really a part of it. It's really exploration, positive intent. Even if we don't fully understand, and this goes back to the like FFI know, being willing to not know, but being dedicated that should we have the whole story, it would make complete sense.
Yeah.
So then it's just spending an awful lot of time, as much time as it takes. Because I have a lot of that over intellectualizing parts, or aloof parts.
Yeah.
Parts that just sort of come in like a fog, which is really dissociative parts, right?
Yeah.
And they all mean well. And if we just sit and they get to trust us. And sometimes that takes a long time. Just takes as long as it takes, really.
Yeah.
Always worth doing, though, in my estimation.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I don't think I have anything else. How about you?
No, I'm good. It's just always wonderful to be with you, my friend.
Yeah, you too. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Hey again. So I'm curious to know if that resonated, if it answered questions, if it left more questions, if it was relatable. Sometimes it's hard to tell. Jen and I were talking when we finished recording that I love recording when I'm passionate about something, when they're, either I'm tired of talking about the stuff I've been talking about, or I just don't have a lot. It's hard for me to gauge these episodes. So it just is what it is. If you're interested in working with Jen, she is great with internal family systems. She's got so much training and skill. I love the stuff that she has. You can reach out to Jen at heartfulnessconsulting.com. If you're interested in working with me, you can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. You want to shoot me an email, tell me how you're being impacted by the podcast. You can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's how your brain is wired. You have a right to cocoon, to make your world small, to do the things that feel comforting to you. It's okay to rest. It's okay to not be productive. It's okay to just take things in your own space and time, to turtle, cocoon. It's also okay if you are feeling active and productive and social and wanting to be out and about and doing things. There is no right or wrong. It's really about listening to what your body is needing and what feels right for you in the moment. It's okay to choose and re-choose. It's okay to make a decision and decide that it doesn't work and then make a new decision. That any and all parts of you and everything that you do is really okay. It's hard when we have those criticizing voices and they're mean to us and it feels like things are never going to end or change. But if you can remind yourself that this is not permanent, there's a saying called fear of the permanent handicap, meaning it's going to last for forever. And it's okay to be scared. It's okay to be excited. It's okay to feel joyful and peaceful. It's okay to feel like things are too much and you're overwhelmed. All of those things are okay. I'm not for everybody. Everybody's not for me. You're not for everybody, and everybody's not for you. And I think when we can come from that place of choosing what our values are and what we want in our lives, there can be more of a sense of empowerment and still be dysregulating. I think that's all I have. Hope you have a blessed day.